Well, greetings and welcome. Thank you for joining me today for this webinar entitled The Power of Identity Self-Awareness, Explaining Your Identity Molecule in 100 Words or Less. For those of you who are engaging with me for the first time, I'm Steve Moore, and if this was a live in-person workshop, I'd look pretty much like this at the front of the room. Today's webinar is closed to the IPSAT community. So everyone participating in this webinar should have completed the IPSAT and either already engaged with a coach or you are preparing to do so soon. If somehow you snuck into this webinar and you are not part of the IPSAT community, I'm not going to try to out you, but I would just ask you to keep in mind some aspects of what we will be discussing today will probably not make complete sense to you, and I would ask you to hold back on asking any questions just as a courtesy to the rest of the group. The idea of identity self-awareness really makes more sense when you're able to think about it in the larger context of destiny processing or life planning. Identity self-awareness has stand-alone value, but in addition to that, it contributes meaningfully to the process of understanding your life purpose. One of my favorite quotes along this line, and we use it in a number of different ways in the IPSAT website and the like, comes from Parker Palmer, who said, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. And I think that's a really insightful way of reflecting this powerful relationship between life purpose and identity self-awareness. When you listen to your life telling you who you are, I believe you're actually listening to God, who is the one that gave you the personality and the strengths and the spiritual gifts that you have, who's provided you with the capacity to develop the skills that you're developing, and who has woven into the journey of your life the life-shaping experiences that serve as the triggers to awaken various passions in your life. God gave you those inner kingdom resources, what we call your identity profile, because he knew that you would need them along with the power of the Holy Spirit to do the good works that he's prepared in advance for you in pursuit of your life purpose. So for probably a little more than 20 years now, I've been using the following destiny processing model. And if you watched the introduction and overview video when you did the IPSAT, you would certainly remember this diagram. And so I would just want to highlight for you again, identity is one of three destiny or life planning, destiny processing variables. And I'm not going to do a deep dive on this. You can go back and revisit the introduction and overview video if you want to revisit this in more detail. But just to briefly suggest that your history variable acknowledges that God has been at work all along in your life. He uses everything in life to prepare you for everything in life. And God is sovereign enough, he's transcendent enough, he's powerful enough to reach back into your journey and bring redemptive value even out of the things that were painful and difficult in your story. Your identity, of course, is what we describe as your identity profile. It's what you have to offer to add value to other people, to contribute to a team, to advance God's kingdom agenda. It's those inner kingdom resources, that unique combination of your personality, strengths, skills, gifts, and passions. And then the opportunity variable is really the platform for influence that God is going to give you as you pursue your life purpose. And the reality is that the opportunities to pursue your purpose in life are going to come. The question is, will you be ready for them? And a big part of answering that question, will you be ready, is reflected in how well you actually understand and to the degree to which you have developed your identity. And you're going to make much better opportunity variable decisions if you have a much richer understanding of your identity. And so I explain that to you because one of the common points of confusion, especially the very early stages of developing that initial draft of an identity overview statement that people have, is sometimes they confuse the idea of a life purpose statement with an identity overview statement. Your life purpose statement is something that you craft based on understanding your history, your identity, and your opportunity. Your identity overview is a statement of your identity. And so life purpose really gives your life purpose statement, or your mission statement, usually gives priority to the issues or causes that flow out of the passions in your identity profile. And the identity overview is really something that explains what tools or resources that you are going to leverage in pursuit of your life purpose. So it's a very significant distinction between these two. The identity is one part of the broader context of life purpose, and it is more a description of the tools and resources that God has given you to accomplish your purpose. The one part of your identity overview that more specifically interfaces or more significantly interfaces with your life purpose are the mature expressions of your passions and the issues or causes that are reflected by those passions. So in my life purpose statement, the idea of living a focused life, finishing well, and joining God in blessing the nations, those really are the issues or causes that flow out of my passions that are reflected in my life purpose statement. So that's just a simple but I think helpful point of clarification in distinguishing the difference between a mission statement or a purpose statement and an identity overview statement. Now, that being said, what I've listed here as an identity overview is not my complete statement. We'll talk more about how and why a little bit later, but let me begin by giving you a look at my entire identity overview statement. This is a 100-word or less statement that is intended to describe what happens when your personality, your strengths, your skills, your gifts, and your passions interact with each other, describing your identity molecule. And we like to emphasize that you don't really understand your identity until you can explain it concisely in common language that would make sense to someone, even if they've never actually heard of any of the tools or resources that you used to discover your identity. I'm not going to read through this statement in its entirety now, but this is the complete, just slightly under 100-word statement. I want to walk you through a 4-step process, or really 4 key principles that I believe will help you in drafting a crisp, clean, and specific identity overview statement using my statement as a model. So the first key principle is simply start with your identity and then your statement. Now, that sounds like a rather obvious principle, but let me just try to unpack what I mean by this. You can't write a statement describing your identity until you genuinely understand your identity. And so it doesn't make any sense to try to put emphasis on wordsmithing something or getting, words on paper until you actually understand your identity. Now, engaging with the assessments, the pre-IPSAT assessments, is part of the process of helping you understand your identity. And the coaching session itself is designed to help you better understand your identity. But you have to have a rich, meaningful understanding of your identity before you can even begin to craft a statement to describe it. The proof that you genuinely understand your identity is you can explain it concisely in common language. So you start this process by getting comfortable explaining each component of your identity profile and what does it mean, what do the results of the various assessments mean in common language. And then you begin to put those pieces together. So let me try to walk you through what I mean by that. Of course, this whole process is integrated in the IPSAT itself, which you have already engaged, which means that you have spent time reflecting on your personality, on your strengths, on your skills, on your spiritual gifts, and on your passions, and you have talked with a coach. And in that coaching session, your IPSAT coaching session, one of the things that your coach asked you in relationship to each of these 5 components was to try to tease out some of the key words or phrases that describe each part of your identity and how those are or should be reflected in your identity overview statement. And so I want to just model this for you as it relates to the components of my identity in my identity overview statement. My Myers-Briggs profile is ENTJ. And when I look at the Myers-Briggs descriptions of ENTJ, the words or phrases that I resonate with most are these. The idea of a global thinker, strategic visionary, intellectually curious, complex problem solver, decisive, clear, and assertive. Now, these aren't the only aspects of that Myers-Briggs profile that I think accurately reflect me, but these are the ones that I particularly gravitate to as being descriptive of me. And if we had time, I could take you to the specific MBTI resources that describe ENTJ and show you these specific words and phrases that come directly from the description of what it means to be an ENTJ. Now, let me just emphasize, you do not need to become an expert on Myers-Briggs in order to write a good identity overview statement, but you do need to have a high-level understanding of what it means to have your MBTI profile. And when I say high-level understanding of your profile, all I mean by that is taking the time to look at the Myers-Briggs description of your profile and identifying which words or phrases from that profile do you believe most accurately describe you. This is my short list. So how does that translate into my overview statement? Well, because we use a green logo for the personality, I'm using green in this. So when it says global thinker, I'm describing that as someone who is a big picture. And I'm not going to go through tying every phrase to every one here, but I want you to see these are the parts of my Myers-Briggs profile that relate to ENTJ. Big picture, bottom line, strategy focused. I love learning and sharing what I learn with others. This is part of that intellectually curious aspect of my ENTJ, and it goes on to explain how that your ENTJs are not only intellectually curious, but they're likely to want to talk about what they're learning with other people. I'm fascinated by how organizations work and enjoy trying to make them better. That's the big picture, strategic visionary, complex problem solver. And so I'm trying to describe my Myers-Briggs preferences in common language that accurately reflect me and would make sense to other people. Now, it's important to recognize that a number of the words that I'm using here are not exclusive to my personality. They also overlap in some cases with my strengths and with my spiritual gifts and with my acquired skills, and that's fairly normal. It is very common for a person to look at his or her identity profile and recognize that there's a reasonable amount of overlap between the various components of their identity. So let me move on to strengths. My top 5 strengths are strategic, learner, relator, responsibility, and activator. And I could have a casual conversation with you about every one of these top 5 strengths. I've spent a lot of time thinking about them. And the strategic strength is reasonably self-explanatory. People talented in the strategic theme tend to be able to create alternative ways to move forward. They can face various scenarios and quickly spot relevant patterns and various issues. The learner theme, as you might expect, are people who are continuously trying to improve. The process of learning is as exciting for learners as the outcome itself. It's exciting to actually be in the process of learning. People who have the relator strength enjoy close relationships. They find really deep satisfaction in working hard with a group of friends or a smaller team in order to accomplish a goal. People with the responsibility theme tend to take psychological ownership of the things that are assigned to them or what they say that they will do. And so they're committed to stable values, honesty and loyalty, etc. People with the activator theme tend to be able to make things happen. They can turn thoughts into action. And they're often impatient. Now, again, you do not need to become an expert on all things StrengthsFinder or all 34 signature themes of talent in order to draft a good identity overview statement. But you do need to have a reasonably high level of awareness of what does it actually mean to have your strengths, so that you can, in normal conversation, explain what that means and be able to see how is this actually playing out in the context of your life. So if we take my top 5 strengths and what it means to have those strengths and overlay that on my identity overview statement, it looks like this. Now, you could take a look at this and think, wow, Steve, your whole statement is really focused on your strengths. And it appears that way, but I remind you again, a significant part of what you're seeing here in red is also represented in other colors because there is a significant amount of overlap between my personality, my strengths, my skills, and my gifts. And so, of course, being someone who has the strategic strength, you can see strategy focused is right up there at the top. When you see the activator strength, I've described that as being action oriented. The responsibility strength is one that I have observed as really significant in my life. And so I went ahead and just kind of explained that in more detail. I take ownership of projects assigned to me and feel an inner responsibility to complete them on time with excellence. That's my responsibility strength. I value deep relationships with a core team or group. That is my relator strength. I love learning and sharing what I learn with others. That is my learner strength. I'm fascinated by how organizations work and trying to make them better. That's my strategic and learner strengths coming out together. So again, you look at this and you think, wow, your whole statement is just focused on your strengths. Well, it looks that way, but the reality is a significant part of what you're seeing here in red is actually represented in other colors as we walk our way through this because it overlaps with other parts of my identity. The top 3 skills that I have identified from my skills inventory are strategic planning, speaking, and Bible study skills. And it's important to understand that skills are differentiated from your personality, your strengths, and your spiritual gifts because of the word choice. You can't choose your personality. You can't choose your strengths. You can ask God to give you a spiritual gift, but ultimately they are distributed by the sovereign direction of the Holy Spirit. You do have 100% control over what skills you will develop. Skill development is a combination of deliberate practice over time. And you get to decide which skills you're going to practice and how much time you're going to invest in those. So it makes sense that you ought to think about developing skills that relate to and support the rest of your identity. So in terms of skills, strategy focused. Now, I have spent a fair amount of time reading and studying and working on models for strategic planning because that really supports a number of other aspects of my identity profile, both my Myers-Briggs, my StrengthsFinder, and my spiritual gifts. So strategic planning is an important skill for me. Speaking is a skill that I have spent some time working on, sharing what I learn with others informally and as a teacher. And so because I'm a learner, because I have the spiritual gift of teaching, which we'll get to in a minute, I've spent some time working on that skill of speaking. And then because my spiritual gift of teaching predominantly expresses itself in teaching the Bible, I have spent a significant amount of time focused on the development of Bible study skills. So you can see how the skill aspect of my identity profile is reflected in my overview statement. Now, in terms of spiritual gifts, my top 3 gifts are apostleship, leadership, and teaching. Now, let me just say a brief comment about spiritual gifts. If you don't know how the spiritual gifts test that you took to discover your gifts, if you don't know how that spiritual gifts test defines your gifts, you don't know what those gifts really are. So, in other words, you can't just take a test, get the results, and then assign your own definition to that. The test assigned a definition to those gifts that was directly correlated with the questions that you answered that produced those results. So if you take a test, get the results, then assign your own definition, it's really not a reliable way of understanding your spiritual gifts. So you have to understand, how did the gifts test define my spiritual gifts? And then based on that, you can begin to think about, how would I describe what those gifts look like in the context of my identity overview statement. Now, in terms of apostleship, the central thrust of the apostleship gift is someone who is gifted to create new ministry structures. The common expression of that is church planting, but it is not the only expression. And I'm not a church planter, but I do love starting new things and creating new ministry structures. The central thrust of leadership is inciting other people toward a common vision. The central thrust of teaching is clarifying new truth. And so my spiritual gifts are reflected in my overview statement very concisely. Please don't look at the small number of words here that are coded blue and think that somehow means that I am de-emphasizing the importance of my spiritual gifts in my overview statement. It's not. I'm just stating them very concisely. So the start something new kind of a leader is essentially combining my apostleship and my leadership gift into one particular phrase. And then as a teacher is very specifically identifying my spiritual gift of teaching. Now, in terms of my passions, I have identified people development, cross-cultural ministry, and refugees as passions that I care deeply about. They're not my only passions, but they're the three that I've chosen to highlight here. Now, the people development passion is a pretty big bucket. And it's really out of that that my life purpose statement refers to helping others live a focused life and finish well. Those two aspects of my life purpose statement really flow out of my people development passion. I'm passionate about helping people develop in part by gaining focus. The IPSAT is a tool I created to help people gain focus. It's one of the practical expressions of my life purpose. And finishing well is another expression of my people development passion focus. And cross-cultural ministry and refugees, I don't need to go into the various factors of my life story, that my passion story, the life-shaping experiences that triggered those passions. But I have chosen to reflect these passions in my overview statement like this. Sharing what I learn with others is an expression of my people development. And I've had life-shaping experiences abroad that fuel a passion to join with God in blessing the nations. That's a sweeping statement that encapsulates both the cross-cultural ministry and the refugee. Now you say, well, couldn't you have been more specific here? Yeah, I could have been more specific. I could have dug more deeply into my refugee passion and the like. And this is where it's really up to you. You're the one who needs to decide what level of specificity and what level of detail is appropriate for you. Now, if you watched the overview video when you were preparing to take the IPSAT, you remember this chemistry of identity metaphor that we use in imagining the various components of your identity profile that God took, mixed together your personality, your strengths, the skills that he wanted you to develop, spiritual gifts and passions, and then poured those into the beaker of your life. And it's important to understand that your identity profile is not siloed from each other. The various components of your identity meaningfully interact with each other, and when they work together, they help form what we describe as your identity molecule. And your overview statement is your best description at this particular moment of what happens when your personality, your strengths, your skills, your gifts, and your passions work together to form your identity molecule. And so that's my overview statement, one more time without the specific color coding. So the first step in this process is just you start with your identity and then your statement. And the deeper, richer, fuller your understanding of your identity, the better your statement is going to be. Okay, principle number 2, and these other ones will not take as long to go through, and I'm intentionally planning to leave plenty of time for interaction with you as we move forward. So principle number 2, every word counts, so make every word count. You only have 100 words, and we limited it to 100 words on purpose. Some people say, well, you haven't given me enough words, and my point is no, we have. The whole point of this is for you to pare it down to the core aspects of what it looks like, what your identity molecule looks like. Now, what I would say to people is a great way to get started in this is to simply begin with I am. It's an identity overview statement. So I would encourage you, unless you come up with something better that just works right with your opening sentence, I would encourage you to just begin with I am and then explain your identity molecule without any filler copy, without any fluff. Try to preserve your 100 words for the meat of what it takes to reflect your identity. So let me just give you a quick example of what I mean by filler copy. And this is an anonymous example from an IPSAT report. I hope to use these skills and strengths to serve God by leading His church to be a community that reaches lost people, which I will do through a number of ways, including preaching, leadership development, worship leading, and church planning. This has got great information in it, but it also has a lot of what I would describe as filler copy that could be removed without negatively affecting at all the quality of that identity overview statement. And in particular, this, I hope to use these skills and strengths to serve God by leading, which I will do through a number of ways. And the point is, by removing that filler copy in just that one sentence, that individual would reclaim 22 words that could be used to more explicitly describe various components of that person's identity profile. So when you look at your statement, be on the lookout for filler copy, and ruthlessly eliminate that filler copy. Now, of course, you need to develop sentences that have a bit of flow to them, that read properly. I get that. But there's a difference between making sure that it reads properly and adding a number of maybe accurate but unnecessary words to the process. So principle number 2 is every word counts, so make every word count. Get rid of that filler copy. Principle 3, focus on the balcony, not on the basement. You may remember, your coach might not have used these words specifically, but you'll recognize the gist of the conversation. But very likely in your coaching session, your coach used these metaphors of the balcony side of each component of your identity and the basement side. The balcony side is you, at your very best. This is the expression of your best self as it relates to your Myers-Briggs profile, or as it relates to your top 5 strengths, or as it relates to the way you utilize your skills or your spiritual gifts or your passions being expressed in your life. The balcony side is the expression of your very best self as a reflection of your identity profile. But there is also a basement side. And that basement side is how your personality and how your strengths or your skills or your gifts or your passions could predispose you to sabotage relationships or to derail your leadership. This is you when you are not at your best. And there are universal derailers that apply to everyone, and then there are unique derailers that apply specifically to you because of your identity, and they are an extension of the basement side of your identity profile. And so let me give you an example of what I mean here. This is, again, an anonymous excerpt from an IPSAT report. When I'm passionate about an idea, I can come across too forcefully and steamroll people who disagree or don't seem to get it. Now, this is very likely a true statement about this individual, and it definitely should not be ignored. It is a very important part of understanding your identity. But this kind of basement description does not belong in your identity overview statement. It belongs in your potential derailer statement. You can't ignore it. You should include it, but you should not include it in your identity statement. Your identity statement is the balcony expression of your identity profile. Your potential derailers are the basement side of your identity profile, and it is a place for both. Actually, just earlier today, I did a coaching session, an IPSAT coaching session with a really gifted younger leader. And when we were reviewing the identity overview statement toward the end of the session, I asked him to kind of reread for me the updated version that he had been making as we went through it. And then I asked him, how do you feel about what you have? And he very insightfully said, there's one part of this that I'm not real sure about. And I said, well, what part is it? And he said, well, I've said in here that, I've identified the fact that I tend to be a perfectionist, and that this can affect my ability to delegate, et cetera. And he said, I'm just not sure if I've worded that correctly. And I said, let's lean into that, because it's a very accurate description of your MBTI profile, but it's actually something that ought to be, and frankly, he already had expressed it in his potential derailer. And so I said, what would you think about simply deleting that sentence and focusing on the balcony side of your identity profile? And he said, you know what, that's exactly what we need to do. He cut it out, reread it, and then he said, wow, now this thing really, really pops. And I had seen that in his statement all along and was looking for the right time to identify it, and it just so happened that as he was reading back his latest version, he spotted it himself, and gave me a great opportunity to highlight the importance of capturing that in the derailer statement, but deleting it from the overview statement. Last one, number 4, front load your statement, prioritize the first 20 to 25 words. Now you only have 100 words, so 25 words would represent, of course, a quarter of that total statement. Now, 100 words might not seem like a lot, but it is actually more than you can comfortably say in a normal conversation. So somebody said to me, Steve, what's your identity profile? The question isn't, is it possible for me to remember all 100 words? Yeah. But it is, the full 100 words is more than I could comfortably communicate in a normal conversation. So as a way of compensating for that, we encourage people to front load your statement by prioritizing the first 20 to 25 words, and to put in that what you think are the most important components or descriptors of your identity profile. The goal in that front-loaded statement is not to say everything about your identity, but to say what is most important about your identity. So this liberates you from feeling like you need to follow an artificial linear process to say I have to include things about my personality first, and then things about my strengths, and then things about my skills, and then things about my gifts, and then things about my passions. I think it is helpful to include passions toward the end, but you can mix up the rest of that based on what's most important. So as you have already seen, my front-loaded statement is actually just a little less than 20 words. I am a big picture, bottom line, strategy-focused, action-oriented, start something new kind of a leader. So this doesn't say everything about my identity, but it does communicate the things that I perceive to be most important. And the people who know me well, who have responded to me about this statement, have said, yes, Steve, I would agree. This is a pretty accurate description of you. So you can see this is my front-loaded opening statement as a smaller percentage of the entire statement. So let me give you just another practical expression of how you can share your overview statement with other people. we have a new shareable feature on the IPSAT dashboard. And so if you log into your own profile and go to this section of the dashboard, so you click on the view your results component under the donut on the previous page, it brings you to this page, which I'm sure you've seen. And then up here at the top, you can see and next to print your results is a link for share your results. And when you click on that link, you'll see that it will give you the opportunity to share your results on Facebook, on Twitter, by email, or on LinkedIn. And this gives you a custom URL that you could also share with someone. It also allows you to use that URL so you can see what you would actually be sharing with other people. So here's a screen capture of this link from my IPSAT shareable. And so what the people are going to see if you share this, they're not going to see anything, any of the numerical side. They're not going to see any scores. They're not going to see what stage you're on. All they're going to see is what your MBTI results are, what your top 5 strengths are, what your top 3 skills are, your spiritual gifts and your passions, and the latest version of your identity overview statement. And I would say, I would recommend that you don't share this with people until you've worked hard to really clarify a crisp, clean, concise identity overview statement that you feel is an accurate reflection of your identity profile. But I did want you to see that you can go to the dashboard, you can go to that share link, and then you can choose the various aspects of this. So if you want to just share this by email, if you want to just capture this link and save it so that you can embed that in an email, you can do so, and you will share this. Now, I cut it off on the screen grab that I did, but the name, your name, would be right down here in the bottom left corner. I apologize, the screen grab didn't catch that, but it's not just going to be an anonymous thing. It's going to actually show you down here, and it will actually show the name of your coach as well. So those are my 4 tips to 4 key principles to drafting a 100-word or less description of your identity molecule. So I've intentionally tried to make this brief and give plenty of time to allow you to ask a question. Kelly is helping me monitor these questions, but I'm happy for you to just put your hand up. Just use the toolbar to, quote, raise your hand. We will unmute your microphone and then allow you to ask the question by voice instead of having to type that question in. So anyone with a question, we'd be happy to answer that. And you can make it as specific as you want. If you want to ask a specific question about your identity statement, I'll be happy to engage you with that as well. And again, just put your hand up. We will unmute your microphone and give you a chance to ask your question by voice instead of having to type the question in. Patiently waiting here, and if we don't have any questions, that's perfectly okay, and we'll get you on with the rest of your day. But we'll be happy to take a question from anyone. Stacy, let me unmute. Go ahead, Stacy.
Hi there.
Yeah.
I was just saying that this has been very helpful. It brought some clarity to really how to draft that statement. It broke it down very well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. You know, you can really do a sort of audit of your identity statement by, doing your own color coding. Which parts of my statement apply to which? So let me go ahead and take another question here. Kathy, go ahead. Kathy, do you have a question?
Yeah, not a question, but I was on a flight a couple weeks ago, and I just went through all of my reports capturing words and phrases. I started, working on the identity statement, but capturing those words and phrases, as you pointed out, was really helpful to go back and say, what stands out and what is repeated in, what overlap is there to the other ones. That was a very helpful exercise. I came out with just one page of, just phrases and words, and that has really been helpful, and I appreciate you explaining how to take that back and not use the same words even, but to rephrase it in common everyday language that people can grasp. So that was really helpful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Wes Harding, go for it. Oops. Well, Wes, I am trying to unmute your microphone, but it looks like you are self-muted. If you have a question, you're going to need, there you go.
All right, sorry about that. Happy Tuesday.
Yeah, thank you.
Other than using this identity statement for self-awareness, is there a way that we can use that as far as building teams, getting people to work together, or kind of having an idea of how productive a team will work before it's formed, by taking those identity statements and kind of meshing them and seeing how they work together? Is there a benefit there?
Completely so. Yeah, let me just mute your mic and let me respond to that, and then I'll give you a chance to ask a follow-up question if you need to. A great exercise for a team would be to print out the last page of the IPSAT report. It's that dashboard report that shows the bar graph, and it also includes the results of each of the 5 assessments and the overview statement. And to give everybody a copy of each person's dashboard, and then have each person go through. And the way I would structure this, Wes, would be to say, I'm Steve, I'm an ENTJ on the Myers-Briggs, and in common language, here's what that means to me. I am a global thinker, think big picture. I'm a bottom line kind of person. I like, bullet points communicated to me instead of the big paragraphs, and I'll ask follow-up questions, blah, 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 blah. Explain, what does that mean? Now, my strengths are these 5, and maybe you don't go through all of them, but you say, I'm going to pick these 2 strengths to explain in more detail about because they're particularly meaningful to me. And then my skills, and here's why I've developed my skills, here's my spiritual gifts, here's my passions. Now, let me explain to you how all of those things actually work together in my life through this identity overview statement. And read that statement for everybody, and then allow people to give feedback, ask questions, and begin to have a conversation. That kind of a collaborative conversational engagement that would be particularly valuable if everybody on the team had done the IPSAT. So, Wes, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and just give you a chance. Does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up to that?
Yeah, the only follow-up is an observation of being able to have each, I see it as a starting point of conversation of identifying how well you work with others, what expectations are, and laying a foundation for relationship, but then, getting into it a little bit deeper will be actually in the work process. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, what I would say is, just to add on to that, Wes, is the biggest limiting factor to the description that I gave you is that there will always be an uneven level of self-awareness distributed among the group for a variety of reasons. In some cases, it's going to be because there's different levels of motivation between the people that are involved. In some cases, just because there's a different level of maturity, life experience, etc. So there's going to be some people who have a really clear, crisp identity statement, and there are going to be some people, and it may not be completely because of lack of effort, have a less meaningful and well-constructed identity statement, and it can be awkward to have that sharing. Now, one of the benefits of that is the people who need to work a little bit harder can be motivated to do so by the example of others. The only other thing I would mention, Wes, is that we are actively planning in the early part of 2018 to release an IPSAT team report. And this would be designed to allow a group administrator to go into a particular group, select any combination of people in that group who have completed the IPSAT, and generate a team report about that group. And it would show, the plan is that it would show their team Myers-Briggs profile. It would show how the strengths of that team are distributed across the 4 domains of strength that Gallup has identified. It would show how that team's skills display in terms of where they have the highest mastery in skills and where they have the biggest gaps. And then it would display their spiritual gifts on a Venn diagram that distributes their gifts along word gifts, love gifts, and power gifts. And then also would show where this team is most passionate. And again, we're hoping to be able to make that available at least for beta testing in the early part of 2018. Yes, question for Al Collins. Go ahead, Al.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, I didn't even know how this works. I'm slow on the IT team.
No, I just unmuted your microphone, so go for it.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I read your book, Knowing Your Neighbor, and there's a lot of stuff in there that applies, and it's affected me in different ways. I have a direct question about your beginning, the overview statement by I am.
Okay.
Now, would you agree that there may be other possibilities, and only because of experience with other organizations, you might say, I will, or as a man of God, etc. You may start off the introductory. But we're all contending for God's kingdom, so I just want your opinion on that.
Sure. It's a great question. I'll mute your mic and respond, then I'll give you a chance to ask a follow-up question. I tried to mention this, and so forgive me if I didn't say it as clearly. If you have a better way to open your statement, there's certainly no reason why you can't. Identity is a reflection. Identity is something that's often described by I am. So I am an ENTJ. You could think of it like that. I am a strategic relator, learner, responsibility, my strengths. Or I am someone who's developed these skills. I am someone who's developed these spiritual gifts. So it's really that reason that we suggest that you begin by I am, just because it is a very short 2-word construct that gets you right into it. But there's no reason why you can't find another way. What I would encourage people to avoid, though, is constructing other introductory phrases that actually turn into filler copy that end up burning some of those precious 100 words. So let me come back to you, Al. Does that make sense to you? Any follow-up question there?
Definitely. I don't need to put in more fillers. You're absolutely right, Steve.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, and have a blessed day.
Thanks. You too. Kathy, I'm going to come back just to make sure. Do you have another question?
Steve, I just wanted to point out something that I noticed in our coaching session and through this presentation that we need to practice and take to heart, and that is a very probably a developed skill of yours to speak slowly and articulate very clearly. When we're in conversation with people, we tend to speak quickly, but in our coaching session, people are processing our words as we're speaking, and I presume that you've developed this over time, that you're very you pace your words and you articulate very well. That just stuck out to me as a skill we should work on.
Thank you. Well, I agree with that, and I appreciate your noticing that. Yeah. Wonderful. I'm looking over the list here, and it doesn't look like we have any more. Several people have already moved on with their afternoon, and I understand that may be you shortly, but I'll hang in here for just another few minutes. Don't want to miss anyone who has a last-minute question. And again, be happy to engage you even more directly around your own identity statement if you want to do that. But just one last call for a question. Okay, I think we've exhausted the questions, and I'll just encourage you to spend some time working on your own identity overview statement, sharpen it up, and then use that shareable link to pass it along to other people. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been recorded. We will make it available to you shortly. It'll be available in a link that we will distribute to the entire IPSAT community.